Point. So thank you so much. When Sarah called me, you do these LinkedIn webinars and you never know. I'm a lecturer at MIT Sloan and I have a class coming in July that you all can look up and check out. And you do these LinkedIns and you never know how quite they're going to hit, right? And, to get Sarah's note and then to talk and to find out, I didn't even know you guys existed, and now I know you guys exist, and what a beautiful, beautiful space to have. As something that might not have been highlighted in my bio is that at Sloan I do teach diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. How to be a leader in a multicultural economy. And so I'm going to be weaving some of that stuff in today, but you guys are going to hear from some amazing folks tactically. So right now we're just going to raise up a little bit. We're just going to go up a few thousand feet and remember that we're here because we care. We care about the health and well-being of women, and specifically what employers can do in building awareness and equity. And we are also here because we understand that while that sentence may sound simple, it in fact is not. We are here because we understand that we need spaces like this, that awareness, well-being, equity can only be done through a village, cannot be done in any other way. So it's a real honor to join you here today for what I know is going to be a powerful conference. When preparing for this talk with Sarah, we were talking about the passion and the commitment of this group and how it emerged and continues to iterate. And I kept on seeing these women coming in my head as we were talking and hearing from the ancestors, women who have said no, and have gotten other people, our male allies included, to say we will not take this lot, but we will build a new one with equity and justice. Women like Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady, yes, but more impactfully, a human rights activist who ensured that the voices of marginalized were given attention. Women like Harriet Tubman, who found a way when there was literally no way. And freedom fighters like Diane Nash, who was a teenager when she turned the tides of the desegregation movement by asking the mayor of Nashville a simple question: do you feel it is wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of their race and color? All of these women proved that any one of us sitting here, and especially collectively, can actually make a difference. That we can create a society that promotes well-being, that promotes equity. Now, all of these women have different stations in life, different barriers to overcome, but they have a few things in common, and a few things that we can all breathe into when doing this work. First, they were clear that they were right. They knew there was a right and a wrong, and they were clear about that. They fought with their eyes on the prize and very little room for compromise. Second, they were fearless. Now, don't get me wrong, what Eleanor Roosevelt could have lost versus Harriet Tubman is not comparable. But both women were fearless about speaking truth to power. And as A. Philip Randolph, organizer of the Pullman Porters, said to Mrs. Roosevelt in a personal letter, "My dear Mrs. Roosevelt, just a word in these days of crisis and of storm and stress to express my deep appreciation for the great service you are rendering in your own way to the cause of democracy in general and justice for the Negro people in particular. I need not tell you that there is a deep affection among the Negro people for you because of your forthright and sincere advocacy in human justice, Because of your attitude for equality and freedom for all people, you are the subject of severe criticism among certain sources. But this has been so with all pioneers of liberty. Lastly, they took action towards their goal. It was as if they could do nothing else. They had to act. As Harriet Tubman famously said, if you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. These lessons are important for us to take with us, for us to tuck them in our hearts, to lean on during hard times. We lean on their successes, their bravery, and their love. So how do we look at this moment today? We can admit we're better than Harriet, right? We can know that we haven't lost everything just yet. But we want to look at this moment remembering that we each have agency, that we are here as some of the most privileged, some of our ancestors' wildest dreams. And we can make change, not only in our companies, but in communities like this. Now, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And when I first heard that quote attributed to Peter Drucker, others have said, Peter didn't say that, so I will continue to attribute it to him or whomever. Peter Drucker's wife probably said it, no, I'm kidding. Peter Drucker, I'm gonna contribute it to him until I hear different. When I first heard that, I was working for Harry Belafonte, and we were working in cities across the country helping gang members start legitimate businesses. It was burnout work, to be sure. And I never understood why. Maybe I was naive, I was much younger then, but it just seemed like people agreed that we were human. We had a plan towards equity, and yet it could never get done. And it was when I heard that quote that I realized the mistake we were making. We were creating beautiful strategies, amazing strategies, Picasso of strategies, but we were pushing them in a culture that wanted to be colorblind, in a culture that did not want to see, did not want to value, especially the young people we were working with. And we worked all over the country. We worked in Appalachia, we worked with Asian gangs in LA, but the common theme was these folks were not being valued culturally by our society. And so as we think about what we do at this moment, when there's so much conversation around narrative, around storytelling, around data, we want to think of how do we shift our employees' culture, maybe our PTA's culture, maybe our family's culture, but you can't boil the ocean. But how do you shift culture so that it can receive the strategy? And I talk a lot about that in my book. I won't go too into it, but I have 7 stages that move us from intention to impact in a culture. And the first 3 are like the honeymoon phase, right? You set a declaration, you sign a pledge. We're gonna hire ladies, yay! And then you go to step 2, right? Well, we're gonna learn about how to hire ladies. We're gonna train, right? We're gonna learn all about it. Meanwhile, ladies are like, you could just ask, okay, yeah, no, let's go to the training. Awesome. And then we start learning a little bit, so then we decide, well, let's take action on low-hanging fruit. We have a hire coming up, right? The minute you start acting on low-hanging fruit, you move out of the honeymoon stage into what I call the pushback phase. And in my book, I break down pushback in 3 levels. First, the pushback seems legitimate. So you legitimize it. Just playing devil's advocate. There might not be ladies to do the work. Just playing devil's advocate. So then you go out and you find the association of ladies who do this work. And they say, oh, I just don't know if it's a cultural fit. And slowly you start realizing that the pushback isn't legitimate. That the pushback is the culture trying to hold on to itself. Trying to hold on to its narrative. And that's when you have to decide, do you lean into the comfort of a culture that no longer serves you in a global economy in the 21st century? Or do you push through it and do what Barbara Clark, wonderful investor, says? Just write the damn check to women. Just write the check. Right? Do you just do it? Do you just do the work? And we're being challenged more than ever in that. I've been working with our Attorney General, who just released a series of guidance along with 17 other states talking about what is still legal. And we want to remember that. So when we think of this moment, we want to think culture, right? What do we accept? What are our norms, our traditions? And then we want to get clear about what it is we're actually talking about. Diversity, equity, inclusion is still good workplace philosophy. We knew that in World War II when women went back to work, or went to work maybe for the first time for some folks. And men were coming back from war, and some of the companies were like, well, we don't want to lose the ladies. There's a great story in this in Mediocrity if you need the citation. And Good Housekeeping and the government started working to tell us, go home, ladies. Thank you for your service. Let men do their jobs, because they were so worried about high white male unemployment, right? So we've been through these cycles before, but it's still good policy, and we must be clear about that. We must remember that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, access is the outcome of a civil rights movement which began to value others, which saw the value in women, the value in people of color, the value in LGBTQ, and eventually people with disabilities. And some of you might be old enough to remember when the economy was going to fail because we were going to do business accommodations for ADA, right? We seem to push back on inclusion a lot in our culture. It's something we want to think of. But valuing diversity in institutions and including others allowed us to see that we needed to do more than just include. But that in order to get the true value of a person, they needed to be comfortable to live their full lived experience. Now, why is this important? Why is it important for everyone to be able to live their full experience? It's because diverse teams are actually more profitable. You can look up McKinsey, you can look up Citigroup, you can look up Deloitte. What you see, and it makes sense, right? No other place in your life are you like, I only eat corn. Right? I mean, we're talking about well-being here, right? Diversity is sort of an essence of well-being, whether that's your revenue stream, your investments, your biology, right? Everywhere else, diversity in strengthening things seems to make sense, except for when we talk about boardrooms, right? So in order to get that profitability, in order to get that effectiveness, we actually need to remember and be clear that this is the right thing to do. In reminding ourselves that we are right, that we have a desire to evolve, that we are calling upon an evolutionary act, we remember that one of the biggest things we want to build while doing this work is empathy. Empathy in a culture will allow you to ride through a lot of things, actually, not just inclusion of other people. And there's 2 types of empathy that you might want to think about which within your culture, within your organization's culture. The first is cognitive empathy, and that's empathy in the mind, right? You kind of get it, right? You hear it and you're like, oh, right, like these stats we just saw. Oh, $500,000 a lifetime. That must suck, right? Like you hear that, it makes sense, it sucks. Effective empathy is actually trying to step in that person's shoes. Actually thinking, what would you do with $500,000 less earning power if you're a man, right? Thinking about what do our Latina, our Black, our trans brothers and sisters, they may even be doing less than what we're doing with our privilege. Effective empathy gets you to feel the emotion more than know the data. And as we know, as much as we want to say data moves people, in our hearts we know because we may have stood on a scale and then still ate some chips, right? We may have read you should only have one drink a month or whatever, and we still go to the ball game, right? Data doesn't always motivate. Emotion can and will. So getting that effective empathy helps people be open, be curious. The Cherokee have an amazing definition for curiosity, which is in like their core values. And it is that my life gets better when I get to know you. That no matter who you are, you have something to offer me, and it is my responsibility, not yours. It's my responsibility to find that out. When we're looking at where does empathy sit, where does culture sit in your organization? Yeah, it sits up top, right? The CEO says it, everyone says yes. But as we know, it actually sits in the bonds between people in the office. And this is what makes employee resource groups so important. They are the fire keepers of your culture. Ralph Lauren has a great model of employee resource groups. They use them for everything, job descriptions, shifts within policy. They also pay them, which is one of the best practices. And so of course, now you're on payroll, so now you gotta do extra work, but it allows the word of mouth of a company to be a lot healthier, a lot less toxic. So let's get clear about what we're shifting and how we do it. Empathy, cognitive, affective, and curiosity. We then want to know how do we actually build those interconnected bonds, maybe in a workplace, maybe in a community, maybe in a space like this. I have a process that I want to share with you that's called the 3 L's. And what's great about this process is it can be done anywhere. Listen, learn, and take loving action. So when you're getting curious, and curious is different from nosy, and if you want to know the difference, come to Thanksgiving. I have an aunt, Joanne, God bless her. You can sit next to her and she'll tell you nosy. She'll show you nosy. The difference between curiosity and nosy is nosy, I'm trying to put you in a box. Do you work? Are you a mom? Are you straight? Are you cis? That's being nosy. Curiosity is first listening to the person, listening to the community, listening to podcasts, not assuming you have something to contribute, but first just listening. Catch up, call it cultural catch up. Secondly, you learn with the community. Do not ask the community to burden you or to burden themselves by teaching you. And then lastly, you take loving action. Now, this is different than just any kind of action. And a good example of this was after the murder of George Floyd, Juneteenth became a federal holiday. Now, if you had been to any Black meeting after George Floyd, Juneteenth as a holiday was not on the top of the list. The Police Reform Act, which was then renamed George Floyd after being renamed Michael Brown, after being renamed Oscar Grant, was on the top of conversation. But yet we, as a culture, decided to take a non-loving action, right? Loving action would have been looking in police reform. We decided, day off, we know about Juneteenth, we like it too. Taking what some people considered a sacred holiday, right? Now, why was that done? Because it was the next thing after George Floyd was murdered. So when you look at an action like that, that should feel like it was a good thing. We did something. It was done without listening and learning about what the community, in fact, was asking for. So when you think about loving action, you want to take action that that person would like you to take. You may have explained this to partners you have, right? I want you to act the way I would like you towards act, right? The golden rule, but the platinum rule is do unto others as they want to be done unto, right? Loving action, censoring the person. Now, once we take loving action, we get one of those attributes that these women have. You get fearless. And I want to be very clear here. You do not have to be fearless before you take the action. By virtue of taking the action, you become fearless. And love allows for that calm. So, we talked about a lot of things you need to do. Ladies, just put it on your list. Allies, put it on your list. But first and foremost, stop and give yourself grace, space, and love. We have to add an attribute that unfortunately a lot of our ancestors didn't have. And that attribute is rest, is breath, is self-love. Give yourself that equitable space that you work for others to have. Treat yourself the way you treat others. Provide yourself that space. Learn how to be free, and then you can teach it. And only then can you teach it. Find support in groups like this. Allow yourself to be human and to feel. We talked about emotions, I remember C.T. Vivian saying, yes, anger is a reasonable response in times of attack. Before Diane Nash and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SCLC, before they did an action, they fasted and they prayed. They gave themselves more than a strategic support. They gave themselves a human support. For them, Christianity was a pillar. For many, it might be religion. For me, it is a spiritual practice. It's also therapy. It's also mimosas with girlfriends, Sunday brunch. But take a minute to think, what is yours? What is your prayers? What are your fasting? What do you give yourself to fight this fight every day? And whatever it is, give it more to yourself. Do it as often as you can, as much as you can. Spend time there. A strong, protected heart and spirit is actually what your employees need right now. Guiding with that energy. Because believe it or not, we are not in our darkest times. As crazy as that feels. Proof, I'm standing here as a Black Puerto Rican Italian with a smidge of Irish woman from Honolulu, Hawaii. We have gotten through worse. And we will get through this. We will build the beloved community that we've longed for, that we know is in us. And more importantly, we will develop a dangerous kind of unselfishness to one another to help us get through. So thank you so much for your time today. Let's listen, learn, and take loving action together and towards one another. Thank you.